When we build something, we usually build it for a purpose. For as long as our creation is suited for the purpose it was built for, we'll continue to use it. When it's no longer relevant or useful, though, it can become abandoned and forgotten, gathering dust and falling into ruin until somebody finds it again years later. All of the places you'll see in this video have been abandoned by the people who created them, and the reasons why might surprise you. This grand, stylish building on an island off the south coast of Cuba looks like it should once have been an enormous theater or a state building. In reality, it was a prison that once housed former Cuban President Fidel Castro. This is Presidio Modelo, which is on La Isla de la Juventud, 30 miles out to sea. Nobody other than those given special permission by the Cuban government is allowed to go near it. The panopticon design of the prison is styled after the Statesville Correctional Center in Crest Hill, Illinois, USA. The idea behind the unusual design is that the inmates would never know for sure when they were being watched or by whom, and so they'd have to be on their best behavior at all times. The building is constructed as a 5-story ring of cells around a central watchtower. There's a seldom visited museum here now, but the prison itself has been disused for over half a century, after frequent riots damaged both the building and its reputation. Red telephone boxes were once as iconic an image of Great Britain as black taxicabs and Big Ben. But since the mobile telephone became popular, they've become obsolete. Now, a collection of them is slowly growing in a tiny village in North Yorkshire, England. They're supposed to be destined for recycling, but with no sign of that work beginning, they're just rusting and flaking away out in the elements, with their cherry red paint fading in the sun. Once upon a time, you'd find these design icons as far away as Malta and Bermuda, all made according to the designs of Sir Giles Gilbert Scott. More than 73,000 of them were in service during the 1980s. Now only a few hundred remain active. Although several hundred of them are standing in this telephone graveyard, some have been turned into art installations, and even mini offices. Of all the diplomatic tricks we've seen used to improve relationships between major countries, this has to be the most unusual. Back in 1993, in an attempt to improve relations between Russia and Japan, the Japanese opened a theme park called Nigata Russian Village in Agana. All of the buildings were modeled on Russian architectural styles, and big money was spent on the facilities. There was a full-sized cathedral here, along with a golf course, restaurants, and even a full-sized dinosaur skeleton. Sadly, it didn't capture the imagination of the Japanese people. It was closed shortly after opening and spent years being refurbished before reopening in 2002. The reimagined park didn't perform any better than the original, and so it closed again 6 months later after struggling to attract visitors. A huge fire damaged the Grand Hotel, and much of the steel has been reclaimed and repurposed. Perhaps the next time the Japanese want to impress the Russians, they should just send a greetings card. Liinahamari was once a harbor of such strategic military importance that people fought and died over it. Now it's a forgotten military base full of archaic equipment and forgotten tunnels. Situated in the Murmansk Oblast district of Russia, it was given to Finland to own and operate under the terms of the Treaty of Tartu in 1920, but has belonged to the Soviet Union and then Russia since 1944. The busy harbor contained a fish factory and a hotel during its years of civilian operation, neither of which are still standing. Liinahamari was seized by the Soviet Union during the Winter War, but then given back to Finland again as part of the Moscow Peace Treaty. During the Second World War, it was a safe route used by Finland and Sweden, as the only area for miles around not controlled by Russia or Germany, although it was briefly occupied and governed by Germany during the war years. As if the ownership situation wasn't confusing enough, it was then bombed by the British and finally conquered once more by the Soviet Union, who drove the Germans out in October 1944. This twisted, hulking steel structure could be the set of a science fiction or steampunk movie, but it's actually the former Hout Fornau 4 blast furnace in Belgium. This eerie, empty building was formerly the heart that kept the Cockerill Somber steelwork plant ticking over. Now, nothing here moves at all. Iron ore was smelted into the core of the blast furnace from the 19th century through until 2008, by which time it was mostly used to supply steel to the car building industry. That industry was badly affected by the global financial crisis of 2008, and the orders dried up. The plant, furnace and all, was sold to another production company in 2012 who promised to reopen it and bring the jobs lost when the plant closed back to the area, but they never followed through on the promise. After further inspection, the plant was considered too old and dated to be of any future use, and so it's now permanently closed for business. Ho Thuy Tien Water Park in Vietnam was supposed to be a tourist attraction of the future when it opened in 2004. Having cost $3 million to construct and launching with a great deal of fanfare. Sadly, that opening day was the most attention the failed park ever got. The construction process had been beset by problems, resulting in the park opened in a half-finished state in order to meet deadlines. The public, unsurprisingly, wasn't impressed with the unfinished product. One thing that had been finished was the giant dragon aquarium, which looms out of the lake at the center of the park. There weren't any real dragons in it, but there were plenty of crocodiles. Ho Thuy Tien struggled financially from the moment it opened and didn't last long. There were whispers it might reopen as a futuristic eco-theme park in 2013, but those plans never came to fruition. Now it's just a hotspot for urban explorers who are sometimes surprised to find a security guard standing outside and charging for entry. There are even rumors that some of the crocodiles still roam the waters of the dilapidated park, looking for Instagram influencers to eat. Mystery surrounds the creation of Murphy Ranch in Los Angeles, California. Local stories say that the land was purchased by a man named Jesse Murphy in 1933, but no record of that transaction exists, nor any record of Mr. Murphy. A German national and suspected Nazi sympathizer by the name Herr Schmidt, also seemingly a pseudonym, was responsible for building the ranch, which comprises of multiple freestanding buildings and fuel tanks. From its appearance, it looks as if it were designed to sustain its inhabitants in isolation from the outside world for years, and so it may have been where Schmidt intended to sit out the Second World War. Local authorities shut down construction work in 1941 after rumbling his plans. It then got a second lease of life as a hippie commune during the 1960s and 1970s, but the hippies were in turn driven out by frequent wildfires in the area. It's since become a frequent target for vandals and graffiti artists, and has descended into something of an eyesore. The optimistically named New Sky building in Shinjuku, Japan, looks like a pile of rusted shipping containers piled on top of each other in a carefree manner. That wasn't the original intention. For a brief period of Japan's history, homes built in this manner were thought to be the apartments of the future. The bizarre style comes from an architectural movement named metabolism, which was popular during the 1970s. It was thought that by making these units in a style where they could be bolted onto each other and rearranged, a neighborhood could physically adapt to serve the needs of a growing population. In practice, they were difficult to build and even harder to rearrange, which meant that shortly after construction, they were simply left to stand and rust. Amazingly, a few people still live here, and the building still gets repainted and washed occasionally. But it's also a popular site for illegal parties full of revelers who enjoy drinking on what looks like and feels like the deck of a battleship. What looks like a flying saucer in Kazanlak, Bulgaria, is actually the former headquarters of the Bulgarian Communist Party. This is sacred ground for communists. The Buzludza Peak upon which the structure is built was the site of a battle between Turks and Bulgarians in 1868, and was also where socialist leader Dimitar Blagov met his followers in 1891 to draw up a blueprint for the nation's future. The celebratory monument was built in 1974 and contained portraits of Lenin and Marx, as well as huge red stained glass window in the shape of a star, a tribute to the Soviet Union. The government fell in 1989, and the building was abandoned. Many visitors and vandals have broken in since and either stolen or destroyed many of the murals and statues. But new murals have appeared, and the structure itself is still a thing of beauty. Since 2018, it's been under 24-hour surveillance by a security team, working for a company who intends to restore it to its former glory. Building for a future that never arrives can be a costly and regrettable business, as the designers of Turkey's Burj Al Babas found out at a price of over $200 million. Luxury castle after luxury castle stands in this space between Ankara and Istanbul, and every single one of them is empty. It looks a little like an eerie, forgotten alternative Disneyland. The developers envisaged the castles as vacation homes for the super rich, and ordered hundreds of them to be built in 2014. By 2018, the developers found that the anticipated orders were failing to materialize, and they went bankrupt. That's left these stunning French chateau-style buildings in a state of limbo. The exteriors with their Juliet balconies are mostly complete. The interiors barely got started. The planned Turkish baths and sports arenas never got as far as having foundation stones laid. The failure of the project has been a major embarrassment for Turkish President Erdogan, who was a vocal supporter of the idea. He'd still like to see Burj Al Babas finished, and hopes that relaxing the country's laws on foreigners becoming citizens may encourage sufficient investment to get the ball rolling again. After 40 years of abandonment, the people in charge of St. George's Church in Lukova, Czechia were concerned that tales of the place being haunted might be responsible for keeping visitors away. Now they're hoping that it might be the ghosts who get people visiting again. The church is ancient, having been consecrated in 1352, but has a long and mysterious history of fires, which have affected it far more than the law of averages suggests they should. A partial roof collapse during a funeral in 1968 was the final straw for the congregation, who'd long believed their church to be cursed. They left and refused to come back. Over the following 4 decades, it rotted from the inside out and was relentlessly looted. Even the church bell was stolen. Then, in 2018, local art student Jacob Hadrava had an unusual idea. He filled the supposedly haunted church full of ghost sculptures. With 30 sculptures in all, the church became a one-of-a-kind tourist attraction in no time. Some of those visitors have started making donations for repair work to fix the church, starting with the collapsed roof. Ross Island was once the base of the Indian penal settlement for the Andaman Islands while under British colonial rule. Now it stands empty, and the trees are doing an incredible job of reclaiming the land. It had briefly been colonized during 1788, but the settlement was quickly abandoned after the British found out that local weather conditions were unpredictable and lethal, resulting in many deaths. It then stood empty until 1887 as a jail to house Indians involved in uprisings against British occupation. It was still being used up until 1942, when it was captured during a Japanese attack. After the war, with Indian independence achieved, it was handed over to the Indians. They chose not to live on it, and so it's now largely empty save for a small museum and shops for visitors, as well as a tiny naval base. The remains of the British-built hospital, swimming pool, church, and stores are still standing, wrapped in vines and branches. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, and you will be the first to know when a new video comes out. Thank you for watching, and see you soon.